When Zephyrin accidentally touches the untouchable billionaire during her job interview, she expects to be fired. Instead, he hires her on the spot, and she has no idea she's the only person in 12 years who doesn't cause him excruciating pain. Welcome back to Proudly Black Stories, my beautiful, amazing Pride family. You all have been so supportive, and I promise to always try my best to give you the best stories as I learn and improve every day. If this is your first time coming across my video, do comment below where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to officially join the Pride family. Now, let's get into today's story. The scent hit Zephyrin before she even stepped inside, bourbon and oak and something sweet she couldn't name, and immediately her vision erupted with color. Violet cascaded across her peripheral vision, threaded through with gold ribbons that seemed to dance in the air only she could see. She blinked hard, trying to focus on the present moment, on the towering white columns of Lochriven Estate, rising before her like something out of a dream. Or a warning? Kentucky stretched endlessly behind the main house, rolling bluegrass pastures dotted with thoroughbreds, their coats gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Somewhere in the distance, she could see the copper stills of the distillery glinting, and beyond that, the dark silhouettes of rickhouses lined up like sentinels guarding liquid gold. She clutched her portfolio tighter, the leather warm against her palm. Inside were flavor profiles she'd developed over 7 years, chromesthetic maps she'd created, pairing colors to taste compounds, letters of recommendation from master distillers who'd initially laughed at a girl claiming to see flavors as colors until she'd outperformed every man in the room. This job, master blender for Lochriven bourbon, was everything, the pinnacle, the dream she'd chased since she was 16, and first realized her strange neurological quirk wasn't a curse, but a gift. A man in a dark suit materialized at the entrance, his expression professionally blank. "Miss Larson, this way, please." She followed him through halls that smelled of old money and older bourbon, past oil paintings of stern-faced Lochriven ancestors, their eyes seeming to track her movement. The estate was Gothic southern magnificence, all crown moulding and crystal chandeliers, but there was something austere about it too, something lonely. They didn't go to an office. Instead, he led her deeper into the property, through a side door and down a gravel path, until they reached Warehouse 5. The moment he opened the heavy wooden door, the scent intensified, the angel's share thick and sweet in the air, and Zephyrin's chromesthesia exploded. Gold, violet, deep crimson, flashes of green like new leaves, all swirling together in a symphony only she could perceive. She'd been in bourbon warehouses before, dozens of them, but this one made her breath catch. Barrels stacked 4 stories high, the wooden ricks creaking softly, sunlight filtering through gaps in the walls in dusty golden beams. It was a cathedral, and bourbon was the religion. "Miss Larson will wait here," the suited man said to someone deeper in the warehouse. Then, to her, with something that might have been sympathy, "Mr. Ashmore will be with you shortly. Please, don't touch anything." Then she was alone, or thought she was, surrounded by sleeping barrels and the ghosts of evaporated bourbon. She walked carefully between the ricks, her heels clicking on the uneven wooden floor, eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. Her portfolio felt suddenly inadequate. What were papers and charts compared to this, to the physical reality of 100 years of bourbon-making tradition? She was so focused on the barrels that she didn't notice the uneven floorboard, one edge slightly higher than its neighbor, aged wood warped by a century of Kentucky humidity. Her heel caught. She gasped, stumbling forward, her portfolio flying from her hands, papers scattering like startled birds. And then there were hands, strong and sure, catching her wrist, steadying her before she could fall. The moment their skin connected, the man holding her made a sound like he'd been struck. His whole body went rigid, his grip on her wrist tightening almost painfully before he wrenched himself backward, slamming into the bourbon barrel behind him, hard enough to make it rock in its cradle. The wooden rick groaned ominously. Zephyrin stared, frozen in shock. The man, Because of course it was him. It had to be him. Pressed back against the barrel like she'd burned him. Adil Ashmore. She recognized him from the few photos that existed online, though none of them had captured the intensity of his physical presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair slightly too long, sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, and eyes, God, his eyes, dark and deep and currently wide, with something that looked like pain. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her own hands flying up in a placating gesture. "I didn't see you. I tripped. I didn't mean to touch you." She knew the stories. Everyone in the bourbon industry knew them. Adil Ashmore, the reclusive billionaire bourbon baron who never shook hands, never accepted embraces, kept even his closest business partners at a distance. Rumors swirled, everything from germophobia to some exotic autoimmune condition, but no one knew for certain because Adil Ashmore didn't explain himself to anyone. The suited man from before, Varen, she'd later learn, appeared as if summoned, along with 2 security guards who looked at Zephyrin like she'd committed an assault. "Sir," Varen said urgently, "are you—" "It's okay." Adil's voice was rough, strained. He straightened slowly, carefully, like a man testing broken bones. His jaw was clenched so tight Zephyrin could see the muscle jumping. "I'm fine." He didn't look fine. He looked shaken, his hands trembling slightly before he shoved them into his pockets. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and Zephyrin felt pinned by that gaze, dissected, examined, catalogued. Then he turned and walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing in the warehouse, leaving her standing there amid her scattered papers, humiliated and certain she'd just destroyed her career before it even began. "I should go," she said quietly to Varen. But Varen was looking at her with an odd expression, something between curiosity and concern. "No," he said slowly. "Mr. Ashmore still wants to proceed with your evaluation. Please collect your materials. The tasting room is this way." She wanted to argue that there was no point, that she'd clearly already failed, but she also desperately needed this job. So she gathered her papers with shaking hands and followed Varen deeper into the warehouse complex, through a door she hadn't noticed, and into a room that made her heart stutter. The tasting room was small, intimate, all dark wood and soft lighting. A table held 5 glasses, each with an amber pour, each unlabeled. Behind them, floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the estate, the setting sun painting everything gold. And at the head of the table stood Adil Ashmore, composed now, his expression unreadable, as if the incident minutes before had never happened. "Sit," he said, not quite a command, but not quite a request either. Zephyrin sat, setting her portfolio aside. Her pulse hammered. This was it, the test, the moment that would determine everything. Adil remained standing, maintaining at least 6 feet of distance. 5 bourbons, he said, his voice low and precise. "Identify each one. Age, mash bill, barrel char level. Impress me, Miss Larson." She knew this test was designed to be impossible. These would be experimental blends, things no one outside this company had ever tasted, proprietary recipes guarded like nuclear codes. But she also knew she was better than anyone he'd ever tested before. She had to be. Zephyrin lifted the first glass, swirling gently, nosing it with her eyes closed. Immediately, her chromesthesia kicked in. Deep, amber light, almost copper, with threads of green running through it. She sipped, letting the bourbon coat her palate, and the colors intensified, shifted, told her stories written in hue and saturation instead of words. 10 years, she said, opening her eyes. 70% corn, 20% rye, 10% malted barley. Number 3, char barrel. Aged in the upper floors of the rickhouse, hotter temperatures, faster maturation. She paused, tilting her head. But there's something else. A secondary maturation, maybe 6 months. Sherry cask. For the first time, something flickered across Adil's face. Surprise, maybe. Or interest. She moved to the second glass, and this one made her smile despite her nerves. The color that bloomed in her mind was extraordinary. Ruby red shot through with gold veins, pulsing and alive. 12 years, she breathed. High rye mash bill, at least 25%. Number 4 Shah, longer toast. And this, she sipped again, savoring. This is revolutionary. Wine cask finishing but not sherry. Italian wine casks, maybe Barolo. The tannin structure is completely different. She could feel Adil's attention focused on her like a laser, but she didn't look up, didn't break her concentration. She was in her element now, speaking the only language that had ever made complete sense to her. The finish, though, she continued, frowning slightly as brown muddiness crept into the gold in her vision. It's losing complexity in the final notes. You're getting good integration in the mid-palate. Beautiful, actually. But then it falls apart. If you switch to first fill wine casks instead of second or third fill, you'd maintain that gold threading all the way through. The silence that followed felt heavy, significant. Zephyrin finally looked up to find Adil staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Across the room, she saw an older man, white-haired and distinguished, who she assumed was Castor, the retiring master blender. His eyes were wide. "She's right," Castor said quietly. "That's exactly the problem we've been troubleshooting for 6 months. How did you—" "I have chromesthesia," Zephyrin said, deciding honesty was her only play now. "I see flavors as colors, shapes, patterns. It's a neurological condition, cross-wiring in the sensory processing areas of the brain. When I taste bourbon, I don't just taste it, I see it. That wine cask finish blend showed me ruby red with gold threading, but the finish turned muddy brown. First fill casks would keep the gold clean through the entire tasting experience. What do you think Adil saw in Zephyrin that made her different from every other master blender who'd applied? Tell me what you think in the comments." Adil moved closer, though still maintaining careful distance, and she noticed he kept his hands clasped behind his back, like he didn't trust them. "You experience the world differently," he said, and his voice had changed, gone softer somehow. "So do I." He gestured to the remaining 3 glasses. "Continue." She did, working through each bourbon, calling out specifications that made Castor nod in confirmation, suggesting adjustments that made the old master blender pull out a notebook and start scribbling notes. By the time she finished the 5th glass, she was flying high on adrenaline and the certainty that she'd nailed it, that she'd proven beyond any doubt that she deserved this position. Adil was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. Then, "You're hired." Relief flooded through her, so intensely she felt dizzy. "Thank you, I won't, but listen very carefully, Miss Larson." He leaned forward slightly, and she caught the scent of his cologne, cedar and smoke, undercut with something crisp she couldn't identify. "What happened in the warehouse can never happen again. I have a condition that makes physical contact extremely difficult for me. If you touch me again, even accidentally, you're fired. Do you understand?" His tone was absolute, allowing no room for negotiation or questions, but she saw something else in his eyes, something that contradicted the coldness of his words. Confusion, maybe, or fear. "I understand," she said. "It won't happen again, Mr. Ashmore." "Adil," he corrected, then seemed to regret it immediately. "Report Monday morning, 6 a.m. Varun will have your contract ready." He left without another word, without looking back, and Zephyrin sat there, amid the bourbon glasses, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with professional victory. Because when their eyes had met, really met, she'd seen a color she'd never seen before in her entire life. Not the colors the bourbon produced, but something that emanated from him, from the space he occupied. Midnight silver, if such a thing could exist, like moonlight given physical form, like the color of shadows at the edge of dreams. It was impossible. Colors like that didn't exist in nature, couldn't exist in her chromesthetic perception. But there it was, surrounding him like an aura, and she had no idea what it meant. The blending lab was everything Zephyrin had dreamed of, and nothing she'd expected. State-of-the-art equipment, gas chromatograph for analyzing chemical compounds, hundreds of sample bottles organized by mash bill and age, a ventilation system that could completely replace the air in the room in under 2 minutes. The workspace itself was all stainless steel and clean lines, but the wall of windows looked out over the estate, grounding the science in the land that made it all possible. She'd been working for 3 weeks, and it was simultaneously the best and most frustrating job she'd ever had. The work itself was extraordinary, creating new bourbon recipes, maintaining existing award-winning blends, consulting on barrel selection and warehouse management. Castor was a patient teacher, generous with his decades of knowledge, and the rest of the team treated her with cautious respect once they'd seen what she could do. But Adil was driving her slowly insane. He found reasons to be in the lab constantly, ostensibly to check on various projects, but she'd catch him watching her with that intense, unreadable gaze. He never came within 6 feet of her, maintaining his careful distance like there was an invisible force field between them. When she needed to hand him a sample or a report, he'd indicate a spot on the counter where she should place it, waiting until she'd stepped away before approaching. It should have felt clinical, cold. Instead, it felt charged, like every careful non-touch was more intimate than actual contact would have been. "Stop staring and try this," Castor said, pulling her from her thoughts. He pushed a beaker toward her containing a pale amber liquid. "New experimental mash bill, 40% corn, 40% rye, 20% malted barley. What do you see?" Zephyrin nosed the sample, and her vision filled with sharp, aggressive reds and oranges, all angles and no softness. "It's too hot," she said immediately. "The rye is overwhelming everything else. You'd need to age this at least 15 years to calm it down. And even then, I don't think the corn would ever integrate properly. The color profile is fighting itself." "Exactly what I thought," Castor said with satisfaction. Adil disagreed, said the Japanese market would love something this bold. "Then Adil is wrong," Zephyrin said, louder than she'd intended. "Is he now?" Castor said. She spun to find Adil standing in the doorway, one eyebrow raised, his expression hovering somewhere between annoyed and amused. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that Zephyrin absolutely did not notice were unfairly attractive. Her job. She needed to focus on her job. "Yes," she said, lifting her chin. "The Japanese market appreciates balance and subtlety. This mash bill is all aggression. No finesse. You'd lose the contract before they finished the first sip." "My office," Adil said flatly. "Now." Castor made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh as Zephyrin followed Adil out of the lab, through the connecting corridor, and into his private office. She'd only been in here once before, and it still took her breath away. Walls lined with books on everything from bourbon chemistry to Kentucky history, a desk that looked carved from a single piece of walnut, and windows that provided a panoramic view of the estate. Adil closed the door and turned to face her, and in the enclosed space, that midnight silver color she associated with him seemed to intensify, filling her peripheral vision until she felt almost dizzy. "You disagreed with me in front of the team," he said, his voice low. "You were wrong in front of the team," she countered. "Would you prefer I let you ship an inferior product and lose a $50 million contract? I'd prefer you remember who signs your paychecks. And I'd prefer you remember you hired me because I'm the best, not because I'm a yes-woman who'll smile and nod at every bad decision." They were standing too close, she realized suddenly. Not touching, Adil would never allow that, but close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that cedar and smoke scent that she'd started associating with late nights in the lab when he'd stopped by to check her progress. His jaw tightened. "You're right," he said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. "About the mash bill, the balance is off." He moved away, putting the desk between them like a barrier. "But don't make a habit of challenging me publicly." Then don't make a habit of being publicly wrong, she said sweetly. Something flashed in his eyes, gone too quickly for her to identify. Get back to work, Zephyrin. The use of her first name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. He'd been calling her Miss Larson for 3 weeks, maintaining that formal distance in language as much as in physical space. This felt like a crack in his armor, small but significant. She left, before she could do something stupid, like ask him why he'd said her name like that, like it meant something. The Kentucky Bourbon Festival in Bardstown was overwhelming in the best way possible. Thousands of bourbon enthusiasts crowding the streets, distillery tents offering tastings, seminars on everything from barrel making to bourbon cocktails. Zephyrin had been to plenty of industry events, but never as a representative of one of the most prestigious bourbon houses in the state. The Lochraven tent was positioned prominently on Main Street, their bottles displayed like crown jewels, and she was here as their new master blender, which still felt surreal. What felt even more surreal was that Kyle was with her. Kyle Mordain, her boyfriend of 8 months, tall and charming in that easy way that had first attracted her. He trained thoroughbreds at one of the smaller farms outside Lexington, and he'd been thrilled when she'd invited him to the festival, seeing it as a romantic weekend getaway. She should have been thrilled too. Instead, she kept scanning the crowd for a tall, dark-haired figure who kept his distance from everyone. "This is incredible, Zeph," Kyle said. His arm draped casually around her waist as they walked through the Lochraven tent. "You're incredible. Look at all this. It's a team effort." She demurred, but she was smiling. Today was a good day. This morning she'd competed in the blind tasting competition, going up against 50 of the best palates in the industry, and she'd won. Actually won. Identifying all 20 bourbons correctly, including 2 that she'd nailed down to the specific barrel number. The victory was still singing in her veins. "The winner needs champagne," Kale declared, pulling her toward the bar. That's when she saw Adil. He was standing near the back of the tent, partially hidden behind a display of their limited edition bottles, and he was watching her, just watching, with an expression she couldn't read, but that made her skin prickle with awareness. He wore all black as usual and seemed to absorb the light around him, creating a void in the festive atmosphere. Their eyes met across the tent, and Zephyrin forgot to breathe. That midnight silver color exploded in her vision, so intense it whited out everything else for a moment. She'd never experienced a chromesthetic response this strong to anything other than bourbon, and she had no framework for understanding what it meant. Kyle kissed her cheek, congratulating her again, his lips warm against her skin. But Zephyrin's eyes were still locked with Adil's, and she watched something dangerous flash across his face before his expression went carefully blank. He turned and walked out of the tent without a word. "You okay, babe?" Kyle asked, following her gaze. "You look distracted." "Fine," she said quickly. "Just lots of people, you know?" But she wasn't fine. For the rest of the afternoon, she felt Adil's presence like a magnetic pull. Every time she looked up, he was there, somewhere in her peripheral vision, maintaining his distance from the crowds, but never quite leaving. When she gave an impromptu talk about flavor profiling to a group of bourbon enthusiasts, she felt his eyes on her. When she laughed at something Kale said, she caught Adil's jaw tightening before he turned away. It was late afternoon when she finally found him alone, standing outside the Lochraven tent, looking out over the festival crowds with an expression of carefully controlled isolation. Everyone around him was celebrating, connecting, touching, the casual physicality of human interaction on full display. And he stood apart from it all, untouchable and alone. Something in her chest squeezed painfully. "Why do you look at me like that?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Adil turned slowly, and in the golden hour light, his features seemed sharper, more defined. "Like what, Zephyrin?" "Like you're starving." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them were saying. Festival sounds, laughter and music, and the clink of glasses felt very far away. "Because I am," he said finally, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. Before she could ask what he meant, what any of this meant, KL appeared with 2 glasses of bourbon. "There you are, babe. Hey, you must be the famous Adil Ashmore. KL Mordain, Zephyrin's boyfriend." He stuck out his hand automatically. Adil's expression went cold, distant. "I don't shake hands." His eyes flicked to Kale's arm around Zephyrin's waist, then away. "Excuse me." He left, and Zephyrin watched him go, her heart doing complicated things in her chest that had nothing to do with bourbon and everything to do with the lonely set of his shoulders as he disappeared into the crowd. "Weird guy," Kale commented. "Is he always like that?" "Always," Zephyrin replied, but she was thinking, "No, not always, not when he looks at me," she thought. That night, back at their hotel, Kale reached for her and she let him, but when he kissed her, she saw midnight silver behind her closed eyelids and tasted cedar and smoke that wasn't there. She felt like she was betraying someone, though she couldn't quite identify who. Kale, for thinking of another man, or Adil, for reasons she couldn't begin to articulate. She pulled away gently. "I'm exhausted. Long day." Kyle looked disappointed but nodded. "Sure, babe. Get some rest." But she didn't rest. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what it meant that the most intense physical response she'd had in months had come from not being touched at all. The call came at 2 in the morning, 3 days after they returned from Bardstown. Zephyrin's phone buzzed insistently, dragging her from dreams of bourbon and impossible colors. Varen's name glowed on the screen. "There's a problem with the Japanese contract," he said without preamble. "Adil needs you in Osaka. Tomorrow. The client wants a custom blend created on site, and they want you specifically after hearing about your festival win." She was on a plane 12 hours later, first-class seat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, trying not to think about the fact that she'd be alone with Adil for 4 days in a foreign country. Trying not to think about the thrill that shot through her at the prospect. Adil was already on the plane when she boarded, working on a laptop, and he looked up when she approached. For just a second something warm flashed in his eyes before the professional mask slammed back into place. "Thank you for coming on short notice," he said formally. "Not like I had a choice," she pointed out, settling into the seat across the aisle from him, maintaining that careful distance. "You always have a choice, Zephyrin." The way he said her name, low and deliberate, made her shiver. This was going to be a long flight. Osaka was beautiful, all neon and tradition existing side by side, and the hotel was obscenely luxurious. They had separate suites on the same floor, and Zephyrin tried not to read anything into the connecting door between them. The meeting the next day was in a sleek boardroom overlooking the city. The executives from Takahashi Hotels were polite, reserved, and openly skeptical when Adil introduced Zephyrin as his master blender. She saw it in their eyes, the dismissal, the assumption that she was decorative rather than functional. She'd seen it 1,000 times before. It never stopped stinging. The presentation went well until the CEO, Takahashi-san himself, made a comment in Japanese to his colleague, clearly not expecting her to understand. "American girl, playing at a man's craft. Ashmore must be sleeping with her." Zephyrin's chromesthesia flared, sharp red anger flooding her vision. She could have let it go, could have translated it diplomatically, or ignored it entirely. But she was so tired of being underestimated, of having to prove herself twice as hard for half the recognition. She responded in fluent Japanese, her voice level but cold. "This American girl has a palate that won your company's international blind tasting competition last month. I entered under a male pseudonym to avoid exactly this kind of prejudice. I identified every single bourbon correctly, including your signature blend. Shall we discuss craft, Takahashi-san, or shall I take my expertise to Suntory instead?" The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Takahashi's face cycled through several colors before settling on an angry red. His senior advisor stood abruptly, said something sharp in Japanese about disrespect, and walked out. The meeting collapsed within minutes. Back at the hotel, Adil's suite, the yelling started immediately. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Adil demanded, his careful control finally fracturing. "That was a $50 million contract. That was a sexist ass who insulted my craft." Zephyrin shot back, her own anger finally finding an outlet. "He assumed I was your mistress, that I couldn't possibly have earned this position on merit. I don't care what he assumed. You just cost me. Your money, right? Everything is about your money, your empire, your reputation." She was shouting now, weeks of tension pouring out. "What about my reputation? What about the fact that I have to fight twice as hard to be taken half as seriously? You don't understand the stakes. And you don't understand what it's like to be constantly disrespected." They were close now, closer than Adil ever allowed, his chest heaving with anger, her own pulse racing with adrenaline and something else, something dangerous. The connecting door was open behind them, her suite visible beyond, and she could smell his cologne, cedar and smoke, could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You're impossible," he ground out. "You're infuriating," she countered. His phone rang, shattering the moment. He answered it, listened, and his expression shifted from anger to shock. "What?" "Yes," put him through. He listened for another moment, then lowered the phone slowly. "Takahashi wants to renegotiate." Your response impressed him. He said anyone passionate enough to defend their craft that forcefully must be the real thing. A pause. "He's offering 60 million instead of 50. Zephyrin blinked. "Oh, Adil repeated, and was that amusement creeping into his voice? They stood there, the anger draining away, leaving something else in its wake. Awareness. The suite suddenly felt very small, very private. Zephyrin became acutely conscious that they were alone in a hotel room in a foreign country, that Adil was close enough to touch, that her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with professional conflict. She should step back, should put distance between them, should remember Kyle waiting back home. Instead, she said softly, "I'm sorry for yelling. I'm sorry for not defending you when he was disrespectful," Adil replied, his voice equally quiet. "That was wrong of me. What would you do if you were Zephyrin, standing this close to someone you're not supposed to want?" Their eyes locked, and Zephyrin saw that midnight silver color intensify until it was all she could see, a shimmering aurora that didn't exist anywhere in nature, but somehow existed in him. She swayed forward, just an inch, hardly anything at all. Adil moved to adjust his stance at the same moment. Their hands brushed, just fingers, barely contact at all. He froze. She froze. The world stopped spinning. His eyes went wide, his breathing ragged, and she waited for him to jerk away like he had in the warehouse, to flinch from her touch like it caused him pain. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at their touching hands like he was witnessing a miracle. "Adil," she whispered. "It doesn't hurt," he breathed, and his voice was filled with such wonder, such confusion, that her heart cracked open. "When you touch me, it doesn't hurt." Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she turned her hand and laced her fingers through his. His hand was warm, slightly calloused, trembling. A shudder ran through his entire body. "I haven't been touched in 12 years, he said, the words barely audible. "Not without pain. Every contact feels like fire ants under my skin, like electrical shocks, like my nervous system is screaming. But you—" He looked up, meeting her eyes, and she saw tears gathering. "You feel like warmth, like coming home." Zephyrin's own eyes filled. She understood isolation, understood being different, but she'd never experienced anything like what he was describing. 12 years without touch. 12 years alone in his own skin. "What's so different with me?" she asked. "I don't know. I don't understand it. But Zephyrin, you're the only person in 12 years who doesn't cause me pain." She stepped closer, still holding his hand, and carefully, telegraphing every movement, she brought her other hand up to cup his face. His eyes fluttered closed, his breathing stuttered, and a single tear tracked down his cheek. "Is this okay?" she whispered. "It's everything," he breathed. The moment hung suspended, perfect and fragile, and Zephyrin knew with absolute certainty that everything had just changed. She had a boyfriend waiting back home. Adil had spent 12 years building walls to keep everyone out. They worked together, which made this complicated in ways she couldn't begin to untangle. But none of that mattered as much as the man in front of her, experiencing touch for the first time in over a decade, looking at her like she'd given him back something precious he'd thought lost forever. His phone rang again. Varen with details about the renegotiated meeting tomorrow. The spell broke. Adil stepped back carefully, releasing her hand, and she saw him shutter his expression, rebuild those walls brick by brick. "We can't," he said quietly. Whatever this is, we can't discuss it. It's too complicated." "Adil, please." The word was almost a plea. "I need to think. I need to understand what just happened before anything else happens." She nodded, even though everything in her wanted to argue, to push, to demand answers he clearly didn't have. "Okay." She left, returning to her own suite, and stood at the window, overlooking Osaka's glittering lights. When she looked down at her hand, the one that had held his, she could still feel the phantom warmth of his skin, still see that midnight silver color dancing at the edge of her vision. Across the connecting door, she heard Adil moving around, and somehow she knew, that he was standing at his own window, touching his own hand, marveling at the impossible thing that had happened between them. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A text from Kale. "I miss you, babe. When are you home?" Zephyrin closed her eyes and didn't answer, because she didn't know how to explain that she just touched a man who couldn't be touched, and in doing so, had touched something in herself she hadn't known existed. The weeks that followed Osaka were intoxicating in ways Zephyrin had never experienced. She'd ended things with Kael the day she returned. A phone call that left him shocked and then furious, accusations spilling out that she couldn't quite deny because they were true. She had fallen for someone else, though she'd never touched Kael again after that moment in the hotel with Adil. Now she and Adil existed in this strange, secret world where touch was a language only they spoke. He'd pull her into the private tasting room under the guise of evaluating a new blend, and they'd stand close enough to breathe each other's air, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw like she was something precious and impossible. In the barrel warehouse after hours, he'd take her hand and just hold it, his eyes closed, a small smile playing at his lips like he was savoring something rare. They hadn't made love yet, though the tension was building toward that inevitability like a storm gathering on the horizon. Adil was cautious, almost reverent, learning touch again after 12 years of isolation. Every kiss felt like a discovery, every embrace like he was memorizing the shape of her body against his. But there were moments that troubled her, small things she tried to ignore. The way his expression would go cold and distant when Varen put a casual hand on her shoulder to look at a blend formula. The time a visiting distiller from Tennessee had kissed her hand in old-fashioned Southern greeting, and Adil had ended the meeting so abruptly the man had left confused and slightly offended. The intensity with which Adil watched her, like she might disappear if he looked away. She told herself it was understandable, that anyone who'd gone 12 years without touch would be protective of the one person who could provide it. She told herself the possessiveness was flattering, not frightening. She was in the blending lab, working on a experimental wheated bourbon recipe, when Isolde Lochraven appeared. Zephyrin had heard about Adil's sister, the co-owner of Lochraven Bourbon, who'd been in Scotland for the past 6 months, overseeing their international whiskey partnerships, but they'd never met. Isolde was striking, all sharp cheekbones and dark eyes like her brother, dressed in an immaculate navy suit that screamed old money and new power. "So you're the one," Isolde said without preamble, circling Zephyrine workstation like a predator assessing prey. She picked up the beaker of experimental bourbon, nosed it with the practiced ease of someone raised in the industry, and set it down with a slight grimace. "Talented, I'll give you that. Pity you're playing with fire." Zephyrine straightened, meeting her gaze evenly. "Excuse me? My brother. You can touch him." It wasn't a question. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" Before Zephyrine could respond, the lab door opened and Adil walked in, stopping short when he saw his sister. Something flashed across his face, anger mixed with what looked like fear. "Isolde," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "When did you get back?" "This morning." "We need to talk, Addy." The nickname was casual, intimate, the kind only family used. "About her." "Not here," Adil said sharply. "Then when?" "When you're so obsessed you can't see clearly. When it happens again." Isolde's voice rose slightly, her composure cracking. Zephyrine set down her pipette. "What are you talking about? When what happens again?" Isolde laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He didn't tell you." "Of course he didn't." She turned to Adil. "Are you going to explain, or shall I?" Adil's jaw clenched so tight, Zephyrine could see the muscle jumping. "Isolde, I'm warning you. 12 years ago," Isolde said, ignoring him, her eyes fixed on Zephyrine. "My brother could touch his fiancée. Only her. He became obsessed, possessive to the point of irrationality. And when he saw her hugging another man, even though it was her own brother, even though it was completely innocent, he lost control." The words hung in the air like smoke. Zephyrine's chromesthesia flared, sharp reds and blacks crowding her vision, the colors of alarm and danger. "I didn't hurt her," Adil said quietly, but his voice was rough with old shame. "I never laid a hand on Sariel. But I destroyed everything else in the room. Furniture, dishes, family heirlooms worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I was so consumed by jealousy, by the fear of losing the only person I could touch, that I scared her so badly she left that same night. I haven't seen her since." He looked at Zephyrine, and his eyes were full of a pain so deep it made her chest ache. "After she left, the touch aversion became total. Absolute. Every contact felt like agony. Until you." Isolde's expression softened slightly. "I'm not trying to be cruel, Addy. But I watched what that dependency did to you. I watched you spiral into jealousy and paranoia. And now it's happening again. Don't think I haven't been told how you react when other men get near her." "I'm in therapy," Adil said tightly. "I've been in therapy for 12 years. I understand what happened. I've learned to manage it." "Have you?" Isolde challenged. "Or are you just better at hiding it?" She turned back to Zephyrine. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're getting into. My brother has a neurological condition, not a psychological one. It's called tactile synesthesia disorder. Fewer than 200 documented cases worldwide. His brain perceives most touch as pain, burning, and electrical shocks. But twice in his life, he's met someone whose biochemical signature, pheromones or skin chemistry or something the doctors can't fully explain, is compatible with his neurology." Zephyrines' scientific mind latched onto the information even as her heart raced. Biochemical compatibility. The doctors explained it as a form of dependency. Isolde continued. His brain becomes addicted to the person who doesn't cause pain. Dopamine floods, oxytocin spikes, all the chemical markers of addiction, not love. And when that person is threatened or taken away, his nervous system retaliates. The pain comes back worse than before. The implications crashed over Zephyrine like a wave. So what we feel, what he feels, it's not real? It's just brain chemistry? "I'm saying what he feels might be amplified beyond normal bounds," Isolde said, her voice gentler now. "And that kind of intensity can become suffocating. Sariel couldn't handle being someone's neurological lifeline. Can you?" Zephyrin looked at Adil, who stood frozen, his expression a mixture of shame and desperate hope. The midnight silver color she associated with him pulsed in her vision, but now it looked different, less like moonlight and more like a cage. "I need," she started, her voice shaking. "I need some time to think about this." She left the lab, Isolde's words echoing in her head, and she didn't look back even though she could feel Adil's eyes following her, could sense the weight of his need pressing against her shoulders like a physical thing. That night, alone in her apartment, Zephyrin tried to make sense of everything. She believed Adil when he said he'd changed, that he understood his condition better now. But Isolde's warning kept replaying, the image of a man so consumed by the fear of losing touch that he'd destroy everything around him. Was that who Adil would become again? Or was 12 years of therapy and self-awareness enough to break the pattern? And more troubling, was what she felt real? Or was she just caught up in the intoxicating idea of being someone's miracle, the only person who could give him something everyone else took for granted? She was still wrestling with these questions when her apartment door lock clicked. She froze, heart hammering, because she knew she'd locked it. The door opened slowly, and Kyle stepped inside, looking haggard and desperate. "How did you get in here?" Zephyrin demanded, standing quickly. "I still have the spare key, remember?" He closed the door behind him. "Zeph, we need to talk. Really talk. We have nothing to talk about. I ended things, KL. That's final." "Is it? Because I did some research on your new boyfriend." He pulled out his phone, and even from across the room she could see it was loaded with information. Adil Ashmore has a documented neurological condition. There are medical records, psychiatric evaluations. Did you know about any of this? That's none of your business. It is my business when I care about you. His voice rose, frustration bleeding through. My sister, Zeph, she dated someone with the same condition 5 years ago. Tactile synesthesia disorder, same thing Ashmore has, and it destroyed her. The obsession, the jealousy, the way he needed her so desperately, it stopped being love and became suffocation. She had a complete breakdown when she tried to leave him. Zephyrin's blood ran cold. Kale, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not finished. He stepped closer. I broke into the medical records database, okay? I know it was illegal. I don't care. I needed to know if you were safe. He held out a flash drive. Everything is on here. His diagnosis, the incident with his ex-fiancée, treatment options he's refused. You deserve to know the truth before you get in too deep. Part of her wanted to throw him out, to defend Adil's privacy, to insist this was crossing every line. But another part, the part that had been unsettled by Isolde's warnings, needed to know, needed to see the clinical reality behind the romance. Leave it on the counter, she said quietly, and then get out. Lose my spare key. Don't come back here again. Kale's face crumpled. I'm trying to protect you. I know. But I didn't ask you to, and I don't need you to. We're done, Kale. Please respect that. He left the flash drive and walked out, and Zephyrin stood staring at it for a long time before finally plugging it into her laptop. The files were extensive, medical records dating back 12 years. She read about the onset of Adil's condition, how he'd woken up 3 weeks before his wedding, unable to tolerate touch. Multiple doctors, multiple diagnoses, everything from conversion disorder to complex regional pain syndrome, before they'd finally settled on tactile synesthesia disorder. She read the psychiatric evaluation after the incident with Sariel, clinical language describing obsessive thoughts, possessive behaviors, an episode of rage-induced property destruction, recommendations for intensive therapy, medication for anxiety, behavioral interventions. But there was something else in the files, something that made her breath catch. Treatment options, experimental therapies that might cure the underlying condition, and notes from his doctors, recommendations he'd refused. One note in particular stood out: patient declines gene therapy trial that might cure touch aversion. States he would rather remain isolated than risk losing the specificity of connection with compatible individuals. Recommend evaluation for dependency disorder. Zephyrin sat back, her mind reeling. Adil had chosen isolation over a potential cure because the cure would mean losing the ability to experience certain people as special, as different. He'd chosen the possibility of finding someone like her, even if it meant years alone, over the guarantee of normal touch with everyone. It was heartbreaking and romantic and deeply troubling all at once. She was still processing when her phone rang, Adil's name lighting up the screen. She almost didn't answer, but her finger hit accept before she could overthink it. "I know Isolde talked to you," he said without preamble, his voice rough. "And I know you're probably questioning everything now. Can I see you, please?" She should say no, should take time to think. Instead, she heard herself say, "Come over." He arrived 20 minutes later, and the moment she opened the door, that midnight silver color flooded her vision so intensely she felt dizzy. He looked wrecked, hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. "Is it true?" she asked, not letting him inside yet. "About the neurological dependency? About what happened with Sariel?" "Yes." No hesitation, no attempt to minimize. "Everything Isolde told you is true. And these." She held up printouts from the flash drive. Medical records that Kale had no legal right to access, but that told her everything she needed to know. Adil's face went pale. "Where did you get those?" "Kale broke into medical databases." "I know. It's illegal. I told him to leave and never come back. But Adil, these records say you refused treatment. You chose to stay isolated rather than risk losing the ability to feel someone as special." "Yes," he said again, and now his voice was barely a whisper. "I chose it." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of saying the wrong thing and losing her. "Because normal touch with everyone felt less valuable than the possibility of extraordinary connection with someone. I didn't know if I'd ever find another compatible person after Sariel left. The odds were astronomical, but I couldn't give up the hope. Does that make me pathological? Probably. Does it make what I feel for you less real? I don't know anymore." The honesty broke something open in her chest. "Can you even tell if you love me? Or if it's just your brain desperate for the one person who doesn't cause pain?" "I ask myself that every single day," Adil said, and there were tears in his eyes now. "Every day I wonder if I'm capable of real love, or if I'm just broken, just a man clinging to the only comfort I can find. And I don't have a good answer, Zephyrin. I can tell you that what I feel has become more than just relief from pain. You challenge me. You see through my walls. You taste bourbon and see colors, and you're brilliant and infuriating, and you make me want to be better. But how much of that is love? And how much is dependency?" He spread his hands helplessly. "I don't know. Here's another question for you, dear listener. What would you do if someone loved you but couldn't tell where need ended and love began?" Zephyrin stood in her doorway, looking at this complicated, damaged, honest man, and made a choice. "I need time," she said quietly. "Not forever, just I need to think about whether I can handle this, whether what I feel is real or if I'm just seduced by being your miracle cure." Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll give you space." He turned to leave, and she almost called him back, almost pulled him inside, and decided to deal with the consequences later. But she needed clarity, needed to separate the intoxicating chemistry from the reality of what a relationship with him would mean. "Adil," she called as he reached the stairs. He turned back, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Even if my brain is confused, even if I need time to think, this isn't me leaving. It's me trying to do this right." He nodded again, not trusting his voice, and left. Zephyrin closed her door and leaned against it, her chromesthesia painting her vision in confused swirls of color that had no name, no meaning, just chaos reflecting the state of her heart. 3 days later, Zephyrin was in the blending lab, trying to focus on work and failing miserably. She'd avoided Adil as much as possible, communicating through Varen or email, and the separation was agony. Not seeing him, not touching him, felt like withdrawing from a drug, which only reinforced Isolde's warnings about dependency. But it also felt like missing someone she cared about deeply, which suggested this was more than just biochemistry. She was testing a new barrel char level, trying to see if deeper toasting would bring out more vanilla notes, when Varen appeared in the doorway looking unusually flustered. "Miss Larson, there's someone here to see Mr. Ashmore," she says. "Well, she says she's his former fiancée." Zephyrin's hands stilled on the beaker. "Sariel? She asked if you'd be willing to speak with her as well. She's waiting in the main conference room." Every instinct screamed at Zephyrin to refuse, to avoid this complication, but curiosity and something else, a need to understand the woman who'd come before her, won out. "Tell her I'll be there in 5 minutes." Sariel Navarre was elegant in a way that made Zephyrin feel underdressed in her lab coat and jeans. Tall, willowy, with the kind of effortless grace that came from old Southern money and cotillion training. She stood looking out the conference room windows at the estate, and when she turned, her smile was genuine but edged with sadness. "You must be Zephyrin," she said, her accent pure Charleston honey. "I've heard about you through the bourbon industry grapevine, the master blender who sees colors. And you must be Sariel, the woman who got away." Sariel's laugh was soft, rueful. "Is that what they say? I suppose it's kinder than the truth." She gestured to the chairs. "Will you sit? I promise. I'm not here to cause trouble." They sat, and Zephyrin studied the other woman, trying to see what Adil had loved enough to almost marry. Sariel was beautiful, yes, but there was also a wariness in her eyes, a careful distance in how she held herself. "I came back to Lexington because I heard rumors that Adil had found someone new who could touch him," Sariel said. "I'm engaged to someone else now, happy actually, but I've carried guilt for 12 years. I wanted to apologize to him, to make peace, but I also wanted to warn you." "About his condition?" Zephyrin asked. "About what that kind of intensity does to you. I loved Adil, truly loved him, but being the only person he could touch became overwhelming. He needed constant reassurance, constant contact. If I was late coming home, he'd spiral into anxiety. If I so much as spoke to another man, I'd see that flash of jealousy in his eyes. It wasn't his fault. I know that intellectually, but emotionally it was suffocating." Sariel leaned forward, her expression earnest. "The night I left, he'd destroyed my grandmother's china cabinet because he saw me hugging my brother. He was immediately horrified, apologetic, but the damage was done. I realized I couldn't be someone's entire world, couldn't be responsible for another person's ability to experience basic human contact. So I ran, and I've regretted the running but never the leaving, if that makes sense." "It does," Zephyrin said quietly. "I'm not saying you should leave him. Maybe he's changed. Maybe 12 years of therapy has given him tools I never saw. But I am saying, make sure you're choosing this with full knowledge of what it means. Because being someone's neurological lifeline is a weight you'll carry every day." Before Zephyrin could respond, the conference room door opened and Adil walked in, clearly summoned by Varen. He stopped short when he saw Sariel, and something complicated crossed his face, old pain mixed with regret. "Sariel," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Adil." She stood gracefully. "You look well. So do you." An awkward pause. "I hear you're engaged. Congratulations." "Thank you. I hear you found someone who can. Well," she glanced at Zephyrin. "Someone compatible." "Yes." Adil's eyes found Zephyrin's, and the longing in them made her chest ache. Sariel did something then that Zephyrin suspected took tremendous courage. She stepped forward and held out her hand. "I wanted to apologize for how I left. You deserved better than me running in the night. You deserved an explanation, a conversation. I'm sorry." Adil looked at her extended hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. The reaction was immediate and violent. He gasped, his whole body jerking back, pain spasming across his face. He yanked his hand away like she'd burned him, cradling it against his chest, his breathing harsh and ragged. Sariel's eyes widened in shock, her own hand trembling. "But I used to be. You could always." "I know," Adil managed, his voice tight with pain. "You're not anymore." Zephyrin was on her feet instantly, moving to his side but not touching, not sure if touch would help or hurt. "What does that mean?" Adil straightened slowly, testing his hand, flexing his fingers. The pain was clearly receding, but had left him shaken. "It means the compatibility changed. Brain chemistry isn't static, it shifts over time, especially after emotional trauma. Sariel and I are no longer neurologically compatible." He looked at his ex-fiancée with something like wonder and grief. "You're just like everyone else now. Your touch causes pain." Sariel sat down heavily, looking stunned. "I don't know if I should be relieved or insulted." "Be free," Adil said softly. "Be glad you're not tied to my broken neurology anymore." "You're not broken," Zephyrin said before she could stop herself, and both of them looked at her. "You're different. That's not the same as broken." Adil's expression shifted into something so tender it stole her breath. "Zephyrin." "I should go," Sariel said, standing. "I got the closure I came for, and maybe you both got something too." She paused at the door, looking back at Adil. "For what it's worth, I hope you found something real this time. You deserve that." She left, and then it was just Zephyrin and Adil in the vast conference room, the silence heavy with everything unsaid. "I've missed you," Adil said quietly. "These 3 days have been agony." "For me too," Zephyrin admitted. "Which is part of what scares me. How much I've missed you, how much I think about you, whether that's healthy need or unhealthy dependency." "I've been thinking too," Adil said, moving closer but still maintaining distance, respecting her request for space. "About what Isolde said, about what the medical records show. And I realize something." "What?" "That I can't ask you to be with me while you're questioning whether it's real, can't ask you to carry the weight of being my neurological lifeline. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to us." He took a deep breath. "So, I'm not going to ask anymore. I'm going to set you free." Zephyrin's heart lurched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying what I feel for you started as desperation. I won't lie about that. A drowning man finding air. But it became more, Zephyrin. Somewhere between Osaka and now, it became real. You challenge me. You don't let me hide behind my walls. You see the world in colors I can't imagine, and you make me want to be worthy of that vision." He smiled sadly. "You told me once that I taste like bourbon and thunderstorms, like midnight silver. You're all of that to me and more. Then why are you talking about setting me free?" "Because I realized, when Sariel touched me, when I felt that pain again, that I can't trap you the way I trapped her. Can't make you responsible for my ability to experience touch." His voice grew stronger, more determined. "There's an experimental treatment, gene therapy trial at Johns Hopkins. It targets the genetic markers for tactile synesthesia disorder. If it works, it could cure me permanently, regardless of who I'm with." Zephyrin's scientific mind immediately grasped the implications. Gene therapy for a neurological condition is incredibly risky. "What are the side effects?" 30% chance of complete sensory loss in the affected areas," Adil said evenly. "I could lose all sense of touch entirely. No pain, but also no pleasure, no sensation whatsoever." "That's insane," Zephyrin breathed. "You'd risk never feeling anything again." "Yes. No hesitation, because as long as you're my cure, you're not truly free to choose me. You'll always wonder if you're staying out of obligation, out of guilt, that leaving me means condemning me to a life of pain. I'd rather risk losing all sensation forever than keep you trapped as my medicine." The selflessness of it hit her like a physical blow. This was love. not dependency. Not a man clinging desperately to his only source of comfort, but someone willing to sacrifice everything to give her freedom of choice. "When?" she asked, her voice shaking. "The procedure is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. There's a preparation period where I need to minimize compatible touch, establish neural baselines." He smiled ruefully. "Which means we can't touch at all for the next 2 weeks. After that, either the therapy works and I can touch anyone without pain, or it fails and I lose sensation entirely. Either way, you'll know that if you choose me afterward, it's real." Zephyrin crossed the space between them, stopping just short of touching. "You're an idiot," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "A beautiful, selfless idiot." "Probably," he agreed, "but I'm an idiot who loves you, dependency or not, biochemistry or not, and I need you to be sure of what you feel before we go any further." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him not to risk it, that she'd already decided she didn't care about the dependency question. But looking into his eyes, seeing the determination there, she understood. He needed this for himself as much as for her, needed to know he was capable of choosing love freely rather than being driven by neurological desperation. "Okay," she whispered. "Do the procedure. And Adil, I'll be there when you wake up, whatever the outcome." He closed his eyes, relief washing over his features. "Thank you." They stood there, close enough to feel each other's warmth but not touching, the 2 weeks stretching ahead of them like a gulf they'd have to cross on faith alone. The 2 weeks were the longest of Zephyrin's life. She and Adil existed in this strange, liminal space, working together but maintaining careful distance, communicating through loaded glances and words heavy with subtext. She threw herself into her work, creating a new blend she privately called Midnight Silver, a wheated bourbon finished in port casks that produced the most extraordinary color in her chromesthetic vision, deep blue-gray, shot through with silver threads. Castor tasted it and declared it the best thing she'd ever created. Asked what inspired it. She couldn't quite explain that she was trying to capture the taste of longing, of love, complicated by neurology and choice. Adil left for Baltimore 3 days before the procedure for pre-surgical consultations. The night before he left, he called her. "I'm afraid," he admitted, his voice quiet over the phone. "Not of the surgery itself, but of what comes after. What if I lose all sensation? What if I can never feel anything again? Then we'll find other ways," Zephyrin said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "Sight, sound, taste, smell. I experience the world through senses most people ignore. I'll teach you." "You've already decided, haven't you?" he asked. "That you're choosing this, choosing us." "I decided the moment you told me you'd rather risk losing everything than keep me trapped. That's not dependency, Adil. That's love." His breath caught. "Say that again." "I love you," she said, the words feeling right and true despite all the complications. "Whatever happens with the surgery, I love you." "I love you too," he whispered. "God, Zephyrin, I love you so much, it terrifies me." They stayed on the phone for hours, talking about everything and nothing, and when they finally hung up, Zephyrin felt settled in a way she hadn't in weeks. This was right. Complicated and messy and unconventional, but right. The surgery was scheduled for 8 a.m. on a Thursday. Zephyrin had driven to Baltimore the night before, staying in a hotel near Johns Hopkins, and she was in the surgical waiting room with Isolde when they wheeled Adil away. He'd looked so vulnerable in the hospital gown, his usual armor of expensive suits stripped away, and when his eyes found Zephyrin's, she saw fear and hope and love all tangled together. "I'll be here," she mouthed, and he nodded, then disappeared through the double doors. 9 hours. The surgery took 9 hours. Zephyrin paced, sat, paced again, her chromesthesia firing randomly as anxiety played havoc with her neurology. She saw colors that didn't exist, patterns that made no sense, her brain's way of processing fear. Isolde was surprisingly good company, sharing stories of Adil as a boy before his condition developed. He was so physical, she said, her voice thick with memory. Always the first to hug people, always touching everything, horses, people, textures. He experienced the world through his hands. When that was taken away, it was like he lost a sense, like going blind or deaf. But he adapted, Zephyrin said. He survived, Isolde corrected. That's not the same as thriving. Not until you. She looked at Zephyrin appraisingly. I was wrong to warn you away. I see that now. What you're doing for him, giving him the chance to choose freely, that's real love. Finally, Dr. Ellsmith emerged, still in surgical scrubs, his expression cautiously optimistic. The procedure went well as we could hope. We won't know the full results until he wakes, and we can run sensory tests, but I'm hopeful. They let Zephyrin see him first. He was in recovery, still unconscious, monitors beeping steadily. She took the chair beside his bed and carefully, giving him something to wake up to, took his hand in hers. His fingers were cool, unresponsive, and she had no idea if he could feel her touch, or if she was holding the hand of someone who would never feel anything again. But she held on anyway, waiting. He woke slowly, eyelids fluttering, consciousness returning in stages. When his eyes finally focused and found her, he smiled, small and wondering. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough from intubation. "Hey yourself," she said, tears streaming down her face. "How do you feel?" "Tired. Fuzzy. Not sure yet about—" He trailed off as Dr. Ellsmith entered with a nurse. "Welcome back, Mr. Ashmore," the doctor said warmly. "Let's run some tests, shall we? What would you risk losing to gain the freedom to love without conditions?" The nurse started simple, touching his arm with a cotton swab, then with her finger, then with varying degrees of pressure. Zephyrin held her breath, watching Adil's face for any sign of pain. "I feel it," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "Pressure, texture, temperature. No pain, just normal touch." The relief on Dr. Ellsmith's face was obvious. "Excellent. Let's try more complex sensation." They went through a series of tests, hot and cold, sharp and dull, different textures and pressures. Each time, Adil reported sensation without pain, his voice growing stronger, more amazed. "It worked," he breathed, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. It actually worked. But when Zephyrin reached for his hand again, ready to celebrate, he pulled back slightly, just a fraction. Her heart stopped. "Adil." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of tears. I need to be sure. I could always touch you, even before the surgery. Now I can touch anyone. I need to know that when I choose to touch you, it's because I want to, not because you're the only option." She understood, but it still hurt. "Okay." Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and laced his fingers through hers. "Before, I touched you, because you were the only one I could touch without pain, because my neurology demanded it." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Now, I touch you because you're the only one I want to touch. Because I choose you, Zephyrin, every version of me, broken or whole or somewhere in between." The tears came harder now, for both of them. "Ask me," she whispered. "What? What you wanted to ask me before all this? Ask me now." Adil sat up carefully, mindful of the IV lines and monitors, and took both her hands in his. "Marry me," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Not because I need you to survive, not because you're my medicine or my miracle, because I love you. Because you see the world in impossible colors, and you taught me that being different isn't the same as being broken. Marry me, because I choose you, and you choose me, freely and completely." "Yes," Zephyrin said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, absolutely yes." He pulled her close, carefully navigating the hospital equipment, and kissed her like a man who'd been given back something precious he'd thought lost forever. And maybe he had. the ability to touch freely, to choose love without the shadow of dependency hanging over it. When they finally broke apart, Isolde was standing in the doorway crying openly, and Dr. Elsmith was smiling behind her. "Congratulations," the doctor said warmly, "on both the successful surgery and the engagement. Though I should note, Mr. Ashmore, you still need to stay overnight for observation." "Worth it," Adil said, not taking his eyes off Zephyrin. 6 months later, Rickhouse 7 was decorated for a wedding. Zephyrin had insisted on getting married among the bourbon barrels, surrounded by the scent and history that had brought them together. White lights were strung between the ricks, flowers woven through the wooden beams, chairs set up in rows that faced a makeshift altar built from reclaimed barrel staves. It was unconventional and perfect. Zephyrin stood in the small office that served as her dressing room, adjusting her dress, a simple silk gown that moved like water, the color of aged bourbon in sunlight. Through the window, she could see guests arriving, bourbon industry people mixed with family and friends, all coming to witness something extraordinary. She could also see Adil, standing near the entrance in a dark suit, greeting people, shaking hands, accepting hugs, each touch deliberate and joyful. He'd spent the past 6 months relearning physical connection, and watching him now, so comfortable in his own skin, made her heart swell. He'd also started riding again, returning to the equestrian training he'd abandoned 12 years ago. The first time he'd groomed a horse post-surgery, running his hands over the animal's warm coat, he'd cried. Zephyrin had watched from the stable door, giving him that private moment of reclamation. "Ready?" Isolde asked, appearing in the doorway. She was serving as maid of honor, their rocky start long since smoothed into genuine friendship. "More than ready," Zephyrin said. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt. Castor walked her down the makeshift aisle between bourbon barrels, giving her away with a proud smile. Adil waited at the altar, and when he saw her, his expression transformed into pure joy. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Adil promised to choose her every day, to never take touch for granted, to love her not because he needed her, but because he wanted her. Zephyrin promised to see him clearly, colors and all, to challenge him and support him, to build a life as complex and beautiful as the bourbon they created together. When the officiant pronounced them married, Adil cupped her face in his hands, still marveling at the simple ability to touch, and kissed her deeply. The guests erupted in applause, and Zephyrin tasted bourbon and thunderstorms and coming home. The reception was in the main barrel warehouse, tables set up between the ricks, bourbon flowing freely. Adil had opened the barrel from the year Zephyrin was born, the one he'd been saving for someone who could appreciate it the way he did, and they tasted it together at the head table. "What do you see?" he asked, watching her eyes flutter closed as the bourbon coated her palate. "Gold," she breathed. "Pure gold, like liquid sunlight. It's perfect." "Like you," he murmured, kissing her temple. Their first dance was to a slow country song, Adil holding her close, both of them swaying more than actually dancing. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For seeing past the broken parts, for loving me enough to let me fix them, for choosing me when you didn't have to." Zephyrin pulled back to look at him. "You were never broken, just different. And I didn't choose you in spite of that. I chose you because of everything you are, condition and all." Around them, the party continued. Sariel was there with her fiancé, having sent a generous gift and a note, wishing them happiness. Varen danced with Isolde, their secret relationship finally public. Even Kael had sent a card, a simple message of congratulation that felt like real closure. But Zephyrin only had eyes for her husband, this complicated, beautiful man who'd risked everything for the freedom to love her without conditions. As the night wore on and the bourbon flowed, Adil pulled her aside to the quieter section of the warehouse where older barrels slept undisturbed. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said. "We said no gifts." I lied. He led her to a specific barrel, one marked with fresh chalk. "This is the first barrel of midnight silver. Your recipe, the one caster said was the best thing you'd ever created. We're releasing it as our new ultra-premium line, and every bottle will have your name on it as Master Blender. Zephyrin's eyes filled with happy tears. Adil, you deserve recognition for your brilliance, he said simply, and I want the world to know that the woman I married is a genius who sees bourbon in colors most people can't imagine. She kissed him, tasting bourbon on both their lips, and in her chromesthetic vision, that impossible midnight silver color bloomed, bright and true, no longer a warning or a question but a promise. What do I taste like now? Adil asked, when they broke apart, echoing a question from months ago. Zephyrin smiled, running her hands through his hair, still marveling that he could touch and be touched freely now. Like coming home, she said. Like bourbon and thunderstorms and midnight silver, like everything impossible that exists anyway. Perfect, he murmured, pulling her close again. Because that's exactly what you are to me. Outside, Kentucky stretched endlessly under autumn stars, the bluegrass rolling away toward distant horizons. Inside Rickhouse 7, surrounded by aging bourbon and the people they loved, Zephyrin and Adil began their marriage the way they'd begun everything else, with honesty and choice and the understanding that the best things in life were often the most complicated. She'd come to Lochriven Estate 6 months ago for a job interview, a girl who saw flavors as colors, trying to make her mark in a male-dominated industry. She was leaving as a wife, a recognized master blender, and the woman who'd helped a lonely billionaire remember that being different wasn't the same as being broken. And if that wasn't a love story worth savoring, worth aging like fine bourbon until it reached perfect complexity, then she didn't know what was. The music swelled, the bourbon flowed, and two people who'd found each other across neurological impossibility danced under Rickhouse rafters, choosing each other with every touch, every glance, every moment. Some love stories were simple. Theirs was aged in oak, finished in wine casks, complex and challenging, and absolutely worth the wait. And it tasted like midnight silver, like a color that shouldn't exist but did anyway, like everything beautiful that defied explanation. It tasted like home. The end. So tell me, what would you have done in Zephyrin's shoes? Would you have chosen a love complicated by neurology and dependency, or walked away to protect your heart? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you fell in love with Adil and Zephyrin's journey, smash that like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also, check out the videos on the end screen. Trust me, if you loved this one, you'd certainly love those too. Do take care of yourself. I'll see you in my next story. Lots of love.